Easter. We are finally together here as well as those scattered at home, and it is so good to be together. We hear the familiar story, maybe without the bingos usually, but we hear the story. We sing the familiar hymns. We have a familiar flowering cross. And this morning, we heard Jen share a scripture story, so sort of a retelling of our scripture. I want to invite you to grab your pew Bibles. They're these blue ones, and open and look with me at the John text, which is page 114 in your New Testament. Surprise! Did you find them? Okay. Not every Bible has one, but those of you that had them saw the surprises. Good. There's always something surprising us in our scriptures as we gather. All right now. It's totally my fault, I know. Today, Mary heads by herself to the tomb, and she is surprised to find it empty. So she tells her male disciples, the male friends, and they don't believe her. Now that's not a surprise to me, but they go to check it out for themselves. They are surprised to see nothing but Jesus' linens laying there. There you go. They leave confused, but Mary stays. Good. I wonder what surprises us. Butterflies popping out of Bibles might surprise us. Bingos being shouted might surprise us, but I'm guessing that finding the tomb empty doesn't really surprise us. Those who have been to church before know that that's what's going to happen on Easter. We know that's what will happen. But maybe we find ourselves surprised when someone we love who is in the throes of dementia has a moment of clarity, when we can connect. That is a moment of surprise. Or maybe we're surprised when someone who has been wrestling with addiction is walking clearly in sobriety. Or maybe we find ourselves surprised when we learn that a mental health struggle is eased with a new medication. There may seem to be these tiny surprises, but these are big surprises. There might also be the tiny ones of an unexpected bloom in the crack in a sidewalk. Or maybe an amazing cloud formation as you're driving that you almost need to pull over because you're so amazed by it. These are tiny God surprises all around us. So this morning, the empty tomb is not the end of the stories surprising us. Mary, through her tears, she seems to decide to get up and go home. It's then that she turns around and she is surprised again. This time surprised by Jesus. I invite you to look at this image of the resurrection as done by Joel Schoon Tanis. And you probably can't read the tiny words, but it says this: "Then on Easter, Jesus wasn't dead anymore," which tells you a lot about God too, probably. "And he snuck up on his good friend Mary in the garden, and he just started talking to her. He could have at least said, 'Surprise,' or 'Ta-da,' or something." I love that essence of ta-da, Because Mary is for sure surprised. Surprised by something that is unexplainable. Susan McCaslin writes in her work, Arousing the Spirit, Provocative Writings, presence of possibilities. Let the hinges of our hearts swing open to the things we can't explain. Let's not demand or expect mystical graces or cling to the hope of them or be disappointed if they don't happen. Let's acknowledge that there are mysteries beyond our knowing, unaccountable margin in the neurons of cells. Mysteries beyond our knowing. Friends, all Mary did that first Easter was turn around, look, and listen. It's there that she experiences surprise. And I venture to believe that that's how we experience surprise too, when we turn around, when we look, and we listen. We allow ourselves to be surprised by hope. We allow ourselves to be surprised by transformation. We allow ourselves to be surprised by mystery, by possibility, by new life, all around us. When we turn around and we look and we listen, we allow ourselves to be surprised by the presence of the risen Christ in our hurting world. Frederick Buechner says this: resurrection means that the worst thing is never the last thing. Resurrection means that the worst thing is never the last thing. The cross is not the last thing. The tomb is not the last thing. Even the empty tomb is not the last thing, because we know from that empty tomb, Mary and the disciples make their way. They stumble as they figure out what it means to be followers of Jesus, who is no longer walking and teaching them as he once was. But that scene isn't the last thing. We know that the early church takes form. Resurrection is because that is not the last thing. Resurrection reminds us that whatever has happened in our lives, that worst thing is not the last thing. When we are willing to turn around, when we are willing to look and to listen, we are ready to witness God at work. And that worst thing, it won't be the last thing. When we turn around and we allow ourselves to be surprised, we can recognize God's grace in our life, God's love in our life, which is abundant and overflowing. And for that, we say thanks be to God. Amen.